are discussing epideictic speaking. This is the last speech of the semester, and it will round out you having done all of the types of speeches that one can do. Quick history lesson. Aristotle, dead white guy, Greek, invented a sense of he said there were three rhetorical genres, right? The forensic, which is what we call did they or did they not commit the crime? So that's the kind of thing that criminal detectives solve. Kind of thing you would do in a court of law when you're kind of did OJ kill Nicole or whatever. All right, then you have epideictic. This is the value driven. So these are the things we give. So when we give a eulogy at a funeral, that is an epideictic. When we give a toast, that's an epideictic. When we give a commencement speech, that's an epideictic. Now, people sometimes call the epideictic the ceremonial speech. That's not quite right, because you don't have to have a ceremony to give an epideictic speech. You can literally stand up in the middle of a meeting and just suddenly start talking about something important to you in an epideictic mode. So people call it the ceremonial speech, but that's sort of the lame version. So we have the forensic, the epideictic, and then the last one is the deliberative. And the deliberative is the one where we decide policy. So that's the stuff we do in Congress. So we've already done a deliberative speech, in a sense. We have not done a forensic, but we kind of rolled the forensic into the deliberative. And what I want you to understand about these three genres is that they are made up, so they're not real, they're not in nature, but they're helpful to think about because when you do the epideictic speech, you don't want to do the other two speeches. So the other two speeches, one is about what we should do about something, the action we should take. And the other one is about whether something happened, what is true, what are the facts. This one is all the stuff that's not that. So, what are the facts? What is true? What caused XYZ? What we call a fact claim. Claims of conjecture. Claims of prediction. We're not interested in that stuff. So that stuff all goes away. Okay? You're not allowed to have any of that stuff in here. Then on the other hand, we have policy. What should we do about it? What action should we take? Especially motivational speeches telling you that you need to seize the day and all that crap. That's also out of here. We get rid of that. What we're left with in the center is all the stuff that belongs to the epideictic. What is the epideictic? The epideictic is the speech about value. It's the one where we talk about which values are important. It's the speech of style. This is where you really want to use your metaphors, your analogies. You want to play with different tropes and figures, alliteration, parallelism, rhyme scheme. And there's a really great website. It's if you just Google Forest of Rhetoric, forest is in place where the trees are, Forest of Rhetoric. It is an entire inventory of every single kind of rhetorical figure that there ever was in the whole entire world. And that gives you some options for things to look through. This is also a time to bring out your old school basic stuff from high school English, right? Vivid description, show, don't tell. This is also a place to use narrative, things like that. The way that we frame the epideictic speech is as follows. You can write this down or not, but after I give my little spiel, we're going to talk about, I'm going to take 2 or 3 volunteers, and I want you to come on and tell me what you think your central idea statement for the epideictic will be, and then I will critique that. These are shorter speeches. They're 2 to 3 minutes, and I typically, they can be longer, but I typically keep them short because, especially for novice epideictic speakers, you really are trying to work really hard with language and delivery, and that can be really challenging, so making them really long is very stressful, so we keep them shorter. Also, these are manuscript speeches, and we do the manuscript speech, so that's the one where you actually physically have a script in front of you, and you are doing a conversational reading of the script. The reason that we do it this way is because, number one, most epideictic speeches historically have either been memorized or manuscript. So if you think about What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass, if you think about Brutus's, if you think about Et tu, Caesar, I come to Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. That's an epideictic. If you think about any of the millions of commencement speeches or that have been splattered all over the internet, those are also epideictics. They almost always are manuscript. The other reason is that these are very stylistic, dense language. So you're thinking more like a creative writer on these than maybe you have historically. And so because the language becomes so much more engaging and vivid and dense, you can read more. Because remember, I taught you this in the beginning, right? The relationship, as the quality of the language goes up, the amount that the audience will tolerate reading goes up. As the quality of the language reduces, the amount that the audience will let you read reduces. Another way to put that is as the quality of the language goes up, the need for lively delivery goes down. As the quality of the language goes down, the need for lively delivery goes up. So there's no world in which you write like crap and then you read. Okay? It's just never going to happen. So if you're going to read, you got to make it beautiful, engaging reading. Because the audience only has your words, right? They don't have your energy, they don't have your passion, they don't have your eye contact. They just have your conversational reading. And if the language isn't really well done and engaging, they're going to get bored and tune out very quickly. You can imagine like me reading you this right now. Even a really good reading, it would be pretty boring. Like you need like the face-to-face if you're going to kind of like do what I would do, which is just sort of generic conversational language. I didn't really think a lot about the style of this particular presentation. Now, there is a fourth genre of speech, and that is called the informative speech. That might be what you might call what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing right now is an informative speech. It's not fact-based, because I'm not really giving you any facts or predictions or prediction science, right? It's not value-driven, except it is, because obviously one of the values I'm trying to teach you right now is to talk about values, and the other value I'm trying to teach you is stylistic language. So the epideictic is sort of buried in the background. I'm not really foregrounding it. And it's not really deliberative because there's not really a debate about policy. I mean, I guess you could argue that I'm doing the policy of making you do the speech, but it's this weird fourth category called the informative. Informative speeches, historically, they were invented very late in the game. Like, you didn't hear about it. Nobody gave informative speeches prior to, like, the 1950s. They're made up for the information age. We now think of ourselves as people who can, like, very rationally, like robots, digest tons and tons of information. But the truth is, people have a very limited tolerance for informative speeches. Even TEDx talks, which are predominantly informative speech-based, don't work unless they really are epideictics with informative pieces. So, we don't do an informative speech in this class because basically an informative speech is like, I'm going to be super boring, I'm going to put in a bunch of facts, I'm going to cite a bunch of research, I'm going to put in a bunch of quotes, I'm going to read it to everybody, and then they're going to be blown away because of all my facts. And we know that that doesn't work. Like, if you've ever been in a class and spent 90 minutes listening to someone lecture you about information, you know how bored you get. So the key to a really excellent informative speech, whether that's a job talk or the answer to the question, why did you apply for this job, or giving a speech about a project that you're working on, or communicating about science or technology or education, giving a lesson plan, I mean, any of that stuff that kind of falls in that informative piece, the key is to really do an epideictic, but put enough information in there that the audience doesn't feel like you're just appealing to their emotions. Even though at the end of the day, that's really all you're ever appealing to, right? Everything comes down to belief systems and emotions, not rationality, even though we keep thinking of ourselves as rational. So the epideictic is really always the speech that you're giving. It's just in occasions like a eulogy, you really strip it of its facts and its information and really focus on the value and the style. And then if you were going to give, say, a TEDx, you would want to keep the focus on the epideictic, but you'd want to pile in more facts and arguments, because if you don't, then it's going to feel contrived to the audience. But the informative genre isn't really a fourth genre. It is the epideictic for the 21st century. And really great speakers, I mean, I don't care if you're talking about like a new app that you invented and you want to get capital investment. Like, watch Shark Tank. When they pitch those products to the people who are going to give them all the money, epideictic modernized for the 21st century with sales figures and facts and a couple of pieces of information about how it works. But at the end of the day, the product has to solve a problem, right? It has to be a value-based argument. And that's what an epideictic essentially is. And then how stylistic and eloquent and literary, we might say, the language is really depends on your audience and your purpose. If you're at a eulogy giving a speech about someone that you loved and lost, much more style is going to be called for than if you're giving, say, a short speech about yourself at a job interview. Now, we've actually already given this speech. So we gave a speech of self-introduction. The speech of self-introduction is the one where you stand up and say something about yourself. Terrible speeches of self-introduction are informative speeches, right? Stand up, here's where I'm from, here's how old I am, here's the thing I did, here's another thing I did, blah, blah, blah. They're lists of facts about you. That's a bad informative speech. It's also a bad speech of self-introduction. Good speeches of self-introduction are epideictic speeches that have a little bit of an informative tone, right? And you saw that. You found a clear value or theme or idea that you were like about, like, this is my thing. You talked about its strengths and its weaknesses. You appealed to it as a value. You used narrative and you used analogy. And you really gave people like one very solid value-driven description about who you are. You did not list facts. And you saw how effective those are in comparison to the kind of thing you might have done if I had just left you on your own to just kind of stand up and give some 2-minute drivel that was just a list of crap about you. So we've already seen the epideictic informative combination in action. And so you've seen how effective that is. Now we're going purely epideictic. All right, so you don't even need the pretense of facts and statistics, although if you look at the sample speeches that I provided, some of them do make good use. There's one with statistics about sea turtles. Another one has quotes about 21 pilots, right? People make creative use of that kind of like information, but it's very rare and it's very, very well done. Otherwise, you really want to stick to analogies, stories, metaphors, and all of the rhetorical figures and tropes that you have. How do you construct an epideictic speech? It's pretty simple. You need 3 things. You need a topic. So what is your speech about? It can't be about you, because we already did that. It could be about a person. It could be about a place. It could be about a thing. It could be about an event. It can be about an idea. Like love can be the topic of an epideictic, right? God can be the topic of an epideictic. So you got to have a topic. So everyone think about like 3 things you might want to talk about. And again, this is like the fun speech. So have fun with it. It could be a celebrity that you either love or don't love or kind of love to hate, whatever. It could be about a TV show. It could be about pop culture. It could be about politics. It could be somebody close to you. It could be somebody that we've met or don't know. It could be somebody who's passed away. It could be somebody who's still living. It could be an event. It could be a holiday. Try to pick quirky stuff too. Frankly, unless you love Rosa Parks and you know a ton about Rosa Parks, I don't want another speech about how Rosa Parks was a very brave civil rights activist. You're not adding anything. Remember, speeches always have to add something of value to the audience, and giving them the same narrative about Rosa Parks that they've given them 100 times before does not add any value. In fact, it really is kind of like shady to Rosa Parks to just phone it in and just use her as an example. Same thing. If you don't really care about Barack Obama, I don't want to hear a speech about how he was the great communicator, because I've heard that speech 15 times. That's what people get when they Google sample ceremonial speeches and they grab them off the internet. And I will see that stuff right away. Think about different topics. Now, you need the second thing, and the second thing is the value or the theme. And we've already talked about the value or the theme with your speech of self-introduction, but a value or a theme is like one word, and it's not it's an idea, right? It's not something that exists in nature. So whereas Kim Kardashian is a thing, it's a noun, that's a topic. Superficial or business savvy or whatever, those are ideas. They don't exist in nature, they're descriptions. So that's how you know you have an idea or a value. All right? And then you need to decide, can someone do Joe Exotic? If you like speeches about Joe Exotic, I hope you have checked out part 1 of 2 of my Tiger King podcast episodes. Episode 9 aired last week. It is called Tiger Kink, part 1 of 2. And tomorrow, part 2 of 2 will air, much longer, much more in depth, Tiger Kink, part 2 of 2. So that's episode 10. So if you like Joe Exotic stuff, I got you. I got you covered. But yes, you could do Joe Exotic. So let's practice. Let's suppose Joe Exotic is our topic. We need a value. And we also need to decide, is this primarily a speech of praise or primarily a speech of blame? Meaning, are we gonna praise Joe Exotic and therefore teach the audience something about him and about themselves and what they value? Or are we going to blame Joe Exotic, and by blaming him, are we going to teach the audience a value or some kind of norm, right? You may not be ironic. Here's why. Every speech I've ever seen from a novice public speaker where they're like, oh no, I'm praising him ironically, it's too hard to deliver. You have to be much better, and you're just learning. So if you really want to write an ironic speech, I mean, you're welcome to do it, but I'd rather you write a literal speech, right? I am here to condemn Joe Exotic for blah, blah, right? Because of this value that he doesn't uphold or whatever. And then if you want to be snarky, I think it's fine to be snarky and ask rhetorical questions as long as you don't overdo it. But for those of you that like the snark, this is the speech where the snark is appropriate. You definitely want to do a speech of blame. But don't make it ironic, because what'll happen is that you won't deliver the irony very well, and the audience is going to be like, I'm confused. Are they praising or blaming this guy? Now in real life, praise or blame happen at the same time. We are perfectly capable. Think about that one best friend you have that's sort of shady. You love them. You're also suspicious of them, and you hate some stuff they do, and you love other stuff they do. So it's very possible to have that super complex relationship. And I would argue most really excellent speeches have a much more complex blame-praise relationship to their topic. So for example, my podcast episodes about Joe Exotic is simultaneously a speech of praise and blame for the same thing. You are new to this though, so you should really focus on one or the other, knowing that some praise or blame might slip in, but you really want to pick one concrete focus, because if you try to do both, it's going to twist you around. There is a very famous, excellent eulogy, which is again a speech that we give when someone has passed away, sometimes called a speech of tribute or a eulogy. They're not always of tribute though. Some of the most famous speeches in history have been people who are supposed to be paying tribute to someone who has passed away, and instead were like, like in the case of Julius Caesar, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. So it's the violation of the expectation that you will praise him at his funeral. That's the problem. All right, so it's a speech about Nixon. So Richard Nixon is the president of the United States. He's Watergate happens. He leaves office in scandal, and he's kind of just like in the dustbin of the American national imaginary. And then we have this fellow, Hunter S. Thompson. So for those of you that don't know Hunter S. Thompson was a very famous journalist. He invented this thing called gonzo journalism, which is sort of like, it's like method acting for journalists. He wrote at a time when that stuff could still happen, before Vietnam happened, and journalists just became basically like lapdogs to the military and the politicians. And so he wrote all these great like expose pieces. He's sort of like, if you think about Vice, but like good, but like equally misogynist. That was Hunter S. Thompson. And he wrote a great eulogy for Richard Nixon in 1992 and published it in Rolling Stone after Nixon died. And that's a really good example of a speech that's about Nixon, but it's not really about Nixon. It's about the kinds of values that we have to believe in to praise or blame someone like Nixon, right? It's also a speech of praise and blame simultaneously, because he both appreciates Nixon because by becoming like a piece of American trash, he united a whole generation of people in their hate for Nixon. And he also obviously blames Nixon because Nixon, to quote Hunter S. Thompson, Nixon broke the heart of the American dream, right? He was like the politician that finally broke the trust between Americans and politicians. And so now we're like, now we've entered a new phase where we don't trust politicians the way that we did pre-Nixon. And it's not entirely Nixon's fault. Again, Nixon is just like the topic for Hunter S. Thompson to make the larger argument about the demise of not only like good investigative journalism, but also the fact that politicians became like corporate sellouts instead of like people who understood that they were rhetorical leaders and visionaries for their audience. And now people like Steve Jobs do that work, not politicians. So anyway, that's a really good example if you want one. I've assigned it to you as homework, but with everything happening, I don't know if you're going to get around to homework, but this one's at least worth reading. And there's also a YouTube of an audio presentation of it. So if you want to listen, you can do that as well. All right, so praise, blame. So you need a topic, you need a value, you need a praise or blame focus. Again, the other one's going to sneak in, but you need to pick one. And again, this is going to be true probably every time you're asked to give a speech. So even though you might soften the praise or blame, and even though the value might hide behind a bunch of data and information, hopefully not too much, but enough, you're always really giving value-oriented speeches. Good speechwriters are almost always speaking in the epideictic mode. Frankly, most average people, unless you run for office or become a criminal attorney, are not going to do deliberative and forensic speeches. They might have little pieces of forensic and little pieces of deliberative, but generally speaking, we're going to primarily be talking about values almost always. That's just what most human beings traffic in. So, if you don't know what topic you want to do, one thing you can do is think about a value that you either love or hate, and then you can think about a topic that might teach the audience that value. If you are really desperate, you can literally go online and Google list of values. So you just type in list of values, and like 100 values will come up. And you can read through them, and you can pick one or two that you like, and you can think about, okay, if I wanted to teach the audience the value of sacrifice, what topic could I attach to sacrifice? And would I be praising the topic because it teaches sacrifice? Or would I be blaming the topic because it doesn't teach sacrifice, right? It teaches selfishness or whatever, because that's the opposite of sacrifice. So that's how you can do it. So one word of caution. When choosing your value, you need to choose complex, sophisticated, interesting values. Altruism, sacrifice, nobility, virility, right? Words that maybe aren't even super familiar to you. Do not pick generic values. Success, love, happiness, kindness, because you will wind up giving a generic, terrible speech. I'm not saying kindness isn't important, but if you're going to give a speech teaching the audience to be kind, that speech had better come correct, or no one's going to listen to it. Right? Because the word itself, kindness, is gratitude, right? It's so overdone that you have a lot working against you to be interesting. So you're better off choosing a value that's a little bit off the beaten path, maybe a word that you're not super familiar with but still resonates with you. This is where having a vocabulary does come in handy, because if you're trying to talk about gratitude, you might want to Google synonyms for gratitude and find a unique word that's kind of like gratitude but maybe has a different spin. That way, you're using unique language to try to capture the audience's attention. I don't want you to do the whole speech in like Klingon. That doesn't, that just alienates the audience. But you need to be just different enough to be interesting. So with that said, I would like you to write in the comments, I praise or blame, whichever one you're going to do. So let's choose Joe Exotic. We'll do 2 samples, right? And if you have nothing to write about, you can choose Joe Exotic as like a sample. Okay. I praise Joe Exotic for teaching us the value of deviancy, right? He's a deviant. You can mean that in a good way or a bad way, right? He's got this like island of misfit toys. He really violates the expectation of the stereotype of like a gay man as well as a conservative Oklahoman and all this jazz, okay? He's a deviant, and you can mean that good or bad. So I praise him because he teaches us the value of deviancy. All right, so there's an example, right? On the flip side, I blame Joe Exotic because, and this is where like language sort of, are you gonna blame him for teaching us something bad, or are you gonna blame him for not teaching us something good, right? So I blame Joe Exotic for, being a misogynist. And again, we're not going for facts here. So like, don't blame Joe Exotic for being a murderer, because that requires you to be forensic and decide that he is guilty, which, he was convicted by the courts. So, I don't care. This is the part of the story I don't really care about. But like, do not write a speech uncovering the facts about how Joe Exotic really killed this woman or her husband or whatever. And definitely don't write me a speech about how Carol Baskin did it all. I do not care. I care about values. I do not care about facts. All right? So those are your choices. So go ahead, write me some stuff in the comments. I praise or blame, pick one. Topic, Joe Exotic, whatever, for teaching us, and then pick your value or your adjective or your theme. And then I will comment on a few as sort of like our examples. And then if anybody, and then I'm done. At that point, like that's the hard part. You really got to come up with your central idea first. And then in another lesson, we talk about evidence, because the rest of the, the drill. You get one central idea statement. The rest of it is evidence. So what narrative are you going to choose? What analogy are you going to use? Where can you throw in a metaphor? Where could you maybe use more information, statistics, if that's the kind of thing you think your audience will appreciate? What kind of rhetorical figures are available to you that we haven't had a chance to discuss yet? So that's what we'll do in part 2 of the lesson. But right now, you need to know what your focus is. So go ahead and write me some stuff in the comments, and I will use them as samples to discuss. Becca, maybe throw one in there to get us started. Thanks for coming, by the way. Becca's my ride or die. I praise dogs for teaching us the value of dependability. Emily, that's mad generic. I love you, but no. Also, all dogs, every dog. I'd pick a dog maybe, fictional, your dog, and then find something unique. I mean, the fact that we can depend on an animal that has no autonomy and can't make decisions for itself. You know what I mean? It's kind of weak sauce. You can do better than that. All right, but I appreciate you going first. All right, same thing with loyalty, same problem. And if you're wondering, just say the sentence to Brandon, and if Brandon is like, nah, then that's not a sentence. So if I say to Brandon, hey, Brandon, I praise dogs for loyalty, Brandon's going to be like, okay, see what I mean? Channel your inner Brandon. All right. I praise the violinist, Heifetz, because he was the living example of humbleness. All right, so that one's pretty good, because I don't know who this person is. And humility is a good one. That one's relatively interesting. So you're not going to say the living example of humbleness, which is wordy. You're just going to say, I praise the violinist Heifetz for teaching us the value of humility. So humility is your adjective. Humbleness is a noun. So humility, good. Good, Brandon. All right. I praise ice cream for diversion. Maybe? That's going to be a tough one, because it's very hard to personify ice cream. All right. Nah. Okay. Yeah. Brandon, just nod. So there you go. So those are really good examples. That's the deal. Anyone want to come up and talk on camera? Camera? Do I say camera weird? Camera? I know. Well, that's fine. So Becca couldn't think of another adjective. But this is it takes some work. If you think that you're just going to magically birth an epideictic central idea statement out of your brain, if you haven't been thinking about it for a while, you're probably not. So you may start with something really generic, like, I praise ice cream because it's entertaining. And then you might start to think about like, okay, maybe entertainment is a good value. I mean, I think, for example, we spend a lot of time crap talking entertainment because we live in this like heavy production driven culture. And so things that are produced purely for entertainment, for example, I just chatted with a journalist from Pure Wow, and they want someone to write an article or like give a quote or whatever about why we continue to watch The Bachelor if it's not why do we continue to watch The Bachelor if we know it's not educational? And I was like, well, why would I watch The Bachelor for education? And they were like, well, but it's not factual and we know that it's bad for women. And I was like, yeah, I watch it because it's bad for women. Society's bad for women. That's why I watch The Bachelor. Because it reinforces all this patriarchal crap that's been bred into me for generations. And yes, I know better, but like, just because I know better doesn't mean I'm going to turn off all that programming. Also, The Bachelor is educational. It's just not the kind of education you're thinking about. You're thinking like it doesn't teach us rational, objective facts, whereas I'm thinking educational. Like every time I watch that fairy tale crap, Rose handling out or whatever get passed around like Disney, you know what I mean? There's something inside me that's like kind of happy to watch that happen. That's the conversation we need to happen. Not just crap all over The Bachelor because it's not factual. I mean, who watches The Bachelor to find out if things are facts? Nobody, right? And if you have not watched Wanda Sykes's Not Normal, I think is the name of the stand-up, her joke about The Bachelor is so hilarious. So very much worth watching. I live The Bachelor, love 30 Rock. Yeah, Camera. Do I say camera weird? Talk about what? I don't know what that says. I couldn't think of another adjective. Okay. Yes. So if anybody wants to come on camera and chat about their central idea statement or their plan, or they don't know what they want to talk about, or they think they want to do something about praising entertainment just for the sake of entertainment because we all need relief, I think that's great. I just don't know if ice cream would be the thing to do it with because you'd have to be really good at talking about ice cream. Normally, things with a little more substance, like a person, a place, I mean, things that have like detail are easier. Now, if you know a ton about ice cream, that's great. But if you're just kind of like, oh, ice cream is fun, then that one's going to make a really hard speech for you. If nobody has questions and nobody wants to come on camera, then we will call it a day. You owe me mini speeches. Could we pick a sport? Holly, you can literally pick anything. But again, I think more specific is better because like not all hockey teams are the same, right? Geneseo hockey isn't, oh my God, I wish I knew hockey players, isn't Wayne Gretzky, isn't the Sabres, isn't, I don't know, the hockey team from the movie Miracle, right? They're all different things. So I think the more specific you go, typically the better, as opposed to praising all hockey because it's like this. That can run into like real kind of generic territory. Yeah, but again, same thing with basketball. Like really all basketball, Little League basketball, the sport of basketball. What are you going to say about basketball that you wouldn't also say about hockey, for example? Is there a specific team you want to praise? For example, I have a super dope eulogy about Kobe Bryant, and I'm waiting for his birthday, and I'm going to pitch it to the mainstream media because Michael Jordan boned that eulogy hard, and I'm not mad at Jordan, right? I'm an American, not a communist. No, just kidding. I love communists. So I'm not mad at Jordan because Jordan is a professional athlete, not a speechwriter. But I'm mad because everyone was like, oh, the speech. Oh, it's exactly what Kobe needed. No, it was a cliche pile of cliche. And Kobe was a unique individual, at least his presentation of self in the public was. And it would be cool to see a speech that actually brought out what was unique about him, not every other generic sports figure speech, which is what Jordan wound up giving, right? So the eulogy Jordan gave for Kobe could have been the eulogy that Kobe would have given for Jordan. See what I mean? Like there has to be specificity, otherwise it feels very superficial. So you got to think about specificity here. But yes, you can pick literally any topic. And anybody else got questions, got comments? If not, this was good. This was my like dirty spiel on the Epideictic. I think some of the samples were excellent. Again, I, praise or blame, topic, for teaching, adjective. Adjective is the value. Going once. Going twice. Okay, that's it. So I'm gonna, if it's a person, not many people would know. Do we explain who they are in the statement or the speech? Emily, You will not have time in the central idea statement to explain who they are, but you will have an introduction in the actual speech. So for example, like let's say you don't know who Joe Exotic is. My central idea statement could say something like, I praise or blame Joe Exotic, the lead character of the series Tiger King, for teaching us. Or I could add like a little bit, but in theory, your warm-up, which is going to warm up the audience to the value, will have enough time that you can briefly connect and describe who Joe Exotic is. Same thing if you're giving a speech for someone who's like a close family member or a friend or a loved one of yours. No one's going to know who that person is. You're going to have to explain that in the speech. But that's true for no matter who you choose. Whether you choose Joe Exotic or whether you choose your neighbor, you should still give a little bit of who they are to sort of just set context so that the person listening is comfortable, because you can't presume everyone knows what you're talking about. But then as the speech goes on and on and on, of course I should really get to know that person, because you're going to be using that person as the vehicle to talk about this particular value. So even though you'll be choosing bits and parts of their life that specifically relate to this value, and you'll be leaving a lot of other stuff out, that's the sign of a good speech, right? All good speeches focus on a specific theme. They don't try to cover all of the stuff. It's up in the notes. All right, good question, Emily. Anything else? Hope everyone's doing okay with COVID. I'm thinking of you and all of your little immunocompromised bodies. I'm hoping you're washing your hands and wearing your face masks, which in my case is a hot pink bandana because there are no masks left. All right, I'm going to call it. This was good. So you are going to owe me a little mini speech, which again is just pass, fail, complete, incomplete. You don't need to get to. But give me like what your best guess at is for your plan for the speech, like your little central idea, maybe a couple of notes, so we can give a sense. And pretty much the biggest question is going to be, is it too generic? Because if it's too generic, right, you're not interesting. And we always want to go for interestingness, because the more interesting the speech is, the easier a time you have being successful. If you start out with cliche, generic, superficial, it's really hard to go up from there. All right, so we will look for the mini speeches, give you some feedback, and I have office hours Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like always, if you want to swing by. If not, I'm thinking of you. I miss you too, Gayla. Yes, you also stay safe and happy, Abby. Bye.